Hello and welcome everyone to Leadership Talks, episode 2. This episode we're going to talk about performance. How do we manage, how do we measure, and how do we motivate for performance? In the first episode we talked moving forward in this new hybrid emerging workplace. And so of course on the one hand we want to create a healthy culture for the workplace, but we also want to be cognizant of performance. And getting those two together, there's a lot of moving pieces in there. So that's the question, a lot for leaders and managers and everybody to get their heads around. So that's the question we're putting to our panel today. So welcome to you all again. We brought back the panel from episode 1. Very grateful for that. Thanks, guys. And again, we have Kathleen Procario from Bacardi, which by now is a household brand, leading spirits company in the world. Kathleen is the head of HR in North America. We have Nicole Barrow, head of HR, I'm going to say CSI Miami. Work it out. CSI stands for Customer Solutions and Innovations for the Americas regions, Deutsche Post DHL Group. And then we have Kathleen Halligan, all the way from Dublin. Kathleen is a chartered psychologist working for People Performance. They're located in Dublin and they work with organizations all over the world, but I know Kathleen particularly from working with ASL Aviation in Dublin. And this as well is a very pertinent topic for them, what they're going through. And my co-host, as ever, Jordan Goldrich. He's a colleague and a fellow coach, and he's also known for the Amazon best-selling book. The title is right there, Workplace Warriors, People Skills for the No Bullshit Executives. So everybody, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Cellene Hoogenkamp. I'm the founder of Global Spirited Leadership and a fellow coach with Jordan. So let's get the show on the road and let's put the question to the panel. So in the context of measuring, motivating and managing our people, what is it that you're doing? What is working? Where are you shifting your focus right now from what you were doing in, call it maybe the old world, from now in a more emerging workplace culture? What is it that you're doing?
Cellene, I can speak to Bacardi and what we're doing. We were fortunate that our performance management process has been in place for a couple of years now. It's called Let's Talk. And what's great about it, or the concept, is that it's an ongoing dialogue, which allows for a lot of flexibility. And it really has come in handy in the past couple of months, not knowing kind of what our targets and measures would be during COVID. But, if you're having the ongoing dialogue and our employees are able to adjust the commitments or the goals that they have, whether that's month to month, quarter to quarter, having the ongoing conversation has allowed for our individuals and management to really adjust with what's going on in real time. I would say that contributes to the culture, and that, the flexibility and the trust that we have for our people, and that they're able to be agile and move through kind of the challenges at hand.
So, yeah.
So certainly more frequent conversations is what we're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, it can even be your weekly catch up with your team that we would term a Let's Talk conversation. So really, it's dependent on the relationship that you have with the team, and it's very flexible,
Super.
So then, Kathleen, do you have the Let's Talk for the individual as well for the team?
No, I mean it more so in terms of your direct reports. So as a manager, I would have Let's Talks with my direct reports, and then likewise with my supervisor. Okay. And so while there are some more official conversations that we do remind folks about, whether that's a mid-year or an end-of-year Let's Talk conversation, there are Let's Talk conversations going on throughout the year.
Right, right. And what I like about the Let's Talk, because I've experienced it, is would you say that it's almost like self-motivating for the individual to have it?
Absolutely, because our employees are creating it themselves, right? That rather than a cascade down approach, we do put out kind of the organization's commitments and maybe by function, but then you build it yourself, and it's tied with actually what we call a Primo profile. So your Primo profile, a Primo is an employee, and it's almost like a calling card in some ways. Talks about your aspirations and where you want to go. You also include your strengths and your development areas for the year. So tied with those performance goals, right? It's more the long-term and the short-term conversation that you have ownership over, and you own that dialogue with your manager on what you're working on for the year.
Right, right. And so now moving like in these more, challenging, stressful times, I hear a lot of people, the big issues are, just coping with stress. It's the unknown, it's the anxiety that creates that, that's extra stress. It's the post on social media, where is it going to stop? And do you feel like, how are your managers trained or adjusting to that? Is that something that's showing up?
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about empathy, right? And leading with empathy and, starting your conversation with your employee. How are you today? No, really, how are you today? What's your energy level? I had a great conversation with an employee earlier this week where we were talking through, how it ties to performance, right? And so if you are leading with empathy and you're being, considerate of somebody's personal situation during this time, how does it show up in a performance review? And to the point of how Let's Talk is flexible, it's adjusting those goals throughout the year. It's, we use a red, yellow, green system of if you're, on target, if it's on track or maybe a little bit behind, and having that flexibility to kind of give a little bit based on circumstance, I think it really does speak to the empathy that we're allowed to have with our employees.
That sounds like a lot of flexibility and local people empowerment, using that term.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, particularly during this time, we've received so many notes of gratitude around just the communications that we've put out or how we've been in touch with everyone, that it really does promote that loyalty to the organization, how empathetic we've been, whether that's being supportive through some of the work from home benefits that we've given them. And in the meantime, just everybody it's very warm and fuzzy over here. Everybody's feeling very blessed and grateful to be part of the Bacardi family.
That's fantastic news. And last episode, we're talking about DHL was saying, keeping people, and the same with Bacardi, keeping people and clients, our customers, at the forefront of the whole conversation. And when I'm listening to you, Kathleen, it's like you actually managing energy.
I think so, but I think that Bacardi has always done that to some degree, right? The culture is based on family, founders, and fearlessness, and the family culture. I think it really plays during this time that we can be so embracing of our people, and I do think that that's been a huge motivator for everyone.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm curious about is to what degree, and I think as Kathleen and Nicole respond as well, to what degree do you find that you're sharing more strategic information, perhaps, and also delegating more of the strategic decision making, because things are moving quickly and it's less easy to get a hierarchical decision? I'm wondering, Nicole, what is your experience with what Kathleen is talking about?
So, well, for me, I can say with probably a little bit of pride, the one thing COVID hasn't really changed for us is our performance management process. So many other things have been changing around us, but that has been a constant, and that continues. So pretty much like Kathleen talked about, we have a pretty defined process in place, and that we've kind of held true to. In terms of strategic decisions, my particular group, we have a pretty dynamic commercial group that we represent, and we're representing and being the single point of contact for our largest customers. So decision making and being agile and flexible needs to be done in a pretty swift way, especially given the environment that we're in. So we tend to find that continues. We're not constrained by as much of the hierarchical as you might think, being in such a large company as DHL.
Yes.
We're in a pretty dynamic environment, so people need to move quickly in order to meet the demands of the business at hand, which we're pretty busy right now, and the needs of our customers.
Yeah.
So that part has not changed.
So are you finding that there are some things that you have done this way forever, because you've done them this way forever, that you're now looking at that are going to need to shift in terms of managing, measuring, and motivating employees?
For us, the bottom line for us, kind of again to Kathleen's point, is keeping everybody connected, right? So we talk about at DHL connecting people and improving lives, and never for us has that been more important, even for our employees. In this current environment, we rely on technology more than we ever have. I would say we were far more face-to-face connected in the past. So given the fact that most people are working remotely in different time zones, supporting customers in different time zones who are also working remotely, and to have a commercial team that has no ability to physically touch and see the customer, technology is at the forefront, and we rely on that heavily, more so than before, to keep us all connected. So as a part of our traditional performance management process, which starts with, very defined meetings. You have your Let's Talk meetings. We have either performance dialogues or scheduled one-to-ones. But, in the past, I think those would probably be more flexible. I think people rely on those touch points ever more today. And so you tend to find those more frequently occurring. And any opportunity we have as leaders to connect with the employees are embraced and sought out. So you tend to find a lot of those touch points to connect people, keeping them informed and being as transparent as you can, and actually listening and getting our cues from the employees themselves. But they are the ones that are craving that connection for sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like many of the things that you were already doing are just translating into a new, even more volatile, complex environment and adding to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Cellene, any questions?
About what Nicole was saying, that more like leadership, more touch points, and in this volatile times, uncertain times, I'm wondering, are you finding that people therefore are working harder and longer hours? Are they putting in more work hours, or? Well, what's that?
I would say, it's so funny that you say that. So in CSI, it's a 24-hour operation simply because we're dealing with customers all over the world. So that's kind of traditional. But I think for those that are used to going to a traditional office and or living on a plane, so we also are a commercial group, right? So the majority of our employees are always used to flying. And so with wings clipped in this environment, everybody's working from home. That also opens up the working window ever so much more. Your calls seem to start earlier and earlier and earlier, and 6 a.m. to deal with your customers in Singapore or, so whereas normally you would say, okay, we would start the day at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Your days are starting much earlier. People are taking calls at 4 a.m, depending on the time zone that they're in, looking for any opportunity that they can to connect to the customers, to even employees. So, definitely the working window has extended. I think people have always traditionally worked pretty hard in my group, but you see the working longer certainly happening, and we're relying on our ability to work smarter and to still get things done and try to manage the balance of making sure that we're preventing burnout, right? And, remembering to take the time to play a little bit and not be 100% go all the time.
So with the managing in this time moving forward, a big component of that is becoming also managing wellness.
Absolutely.
Would you say?
That's been a big focus for us in the Americas. I've lost track of time myself, but in the Americas last week, we hosted 2 wellness sessions just for that reason. And based on our employees, we did a virtual yoga session, which I would never thought I would have done in my group, and a virtual meditation session, which was really well received by our employees. But just realizing, like, we are relying on different tool sets and different things to keep our employees motivated and engaged, and realizing, you know, as much as we want to focus on results, people are having a tough time to balance their own personal and professional lives. So really, the whole employee we're looking at and saying, what can we do to make sure that we're supporting you through this
I love it.
crazy and unusual time.
Very inspiring.
Yeah. So Kathleen, I'm wondering what you're thinking about and focusing on as you hear this.
The Irish wisdom is looking upon us.
Well, you know, it's interesting what both Kathleen and Nicole were saying is a lot of what we're seeing with the range of clients. So we work with clients across the spectrum. So some that are nationally based, where they would have been used to being in the office together, and some who are global multinationals. And for let's say people who work in the global multinationals where they have been managing dispersed teams for a number of years now, they're quite used to that notion of how do you manage people who aren't in the same office as you. And really what we've worked through with them is that, to the point I think, Nicole, you were making there, is that you just as a manager need to be more deliberate in terms of doing what you always do in terms of good management practice, but you've just got to be a bit more deliberate about it, because those incidental conversations or the incidental opportunity to check in with people doesn't happen when they're not in the environment around you. And interestingly, you know, people, managers that we speak with who at the start of, you know, when everyone got sent home to work, they were very diligent about setting up these check-in calls and, you know, having a daily check-in or a weekly check-in. And then when we spoke with some of the employees, they were saying, you know, do we really have to go to all these check-in calls? And I think, you know, Nicole made a lovely statement there where she said, you know, listening to the cues of the employees. And I think, again, that's what managers need to do is to, you know, listen, and I think even ask the employee, what's the best way we can work on this together? How can I manage you most effectively? Because the big thing that we always know and that we need to remind ourselves is that on our team, we have a team of individuals. And I think incredibly importantly, we have to remember that the manager is an individual as well. And so when you start talking about how's the manager managing the performance of the team, it's them starting, you know, that notion of put on your own oxygen mask first and asking yourself, how do I like to be managed? And am I inflicting how I like to be managed onto all of my team? And can I therefore just check in with them to say, how do you like to be managed and how is this working and what can we, you know, how can I change or how can we adapt to make this work most effectively for each other? And then I think when it comes to, because that I think will directly impact motivation, because if we're working with people in a way that they find most effective, then that should motivate them. And then from a measurement point of view, it's about that, what are the outcomes? So, because it's interesting, you know, I spoke with some managers pre-even lockdown, and with a particular group, they were looking at a flexible work policy. And one of the big concerns some of them had was, if I can't see them, you know, how do I know that they're doing what they should be doing? And I was saying, well, when you do see them, how do you know that they're doing what they should be doing? Because you can see them, but they, what exactly are they doing? So the most important thing is the outcomes, and then also managing the expectation of quality or whatever it is around those outcomes, so that I can't remember who famously said, tell people what you want them to do, not how you want them to do it, and let them surprise you with how they deliver the results. So that's kind of what we're seeing and what I'm seeing out there.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm taking out of this is then, when we look at the more hierarchical structures which are still in place, this is more emerging into more of a partnership culture.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually that you say that, because there are sort of differences with where people are at in their career, and I think that is what the manager needs to be very astute to as well. To what degree is the employee saying what they might think the manager wants to hear? And if we imagine the idea, the skill will matrix, where would we plot this employee on that matrix, and therefore what level of support do we need to provide them? And even though they're saying, oh yeah, don't worry, I'll contact you if I need you, maybe saying, I wonder, have they got the smarts enough to know what they don't know, which is one of our biggest challenges, I guess, in our early career, is that notion of unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. So in the office, it's easier to find it out, because you see people, or you can, incidentally ask somebody something. But yeah, if you're remotely at home, maybe the temptation is, I think I know what the answer is, or I think I know what's been done there before. So yeah, that certainly is a challenge.
Yeah, and then the other part of that may be that a lot of people, they just think asking for help is a weakness in that area, whereas it's like almost like voice your unconsciousness and ask for help.
Yeah,
and that's something that needs to be put out there. What I'm seeing with people to, if they are being kept accountable, they also need to be kept accountable and voice it, what it is that they need, and ask for help, and not see that as a weakness in an organization.
Yeah. And again, I think that comes back to, you've got managers who are people too, they're individuals, and it's about helping them recognize how to recognize who are the people who may not, who may think, oh gosh, if I ask a question, it demonstrates weakness. So how can they overcome that? Or because even just saying to someone, please do ask me a question, doesn't guarantee that they're going to do it. So you've then got to look at, how do I, have that conversation that forces people, or that tries to uncover if people aren't asking questions that they should be. And I'm just thinking that probably links into when you're working in a global organization and you have people on your team, let's say from different countries where English isn't their first language, and you have people on a group call and you say, now does everyone understand? And yes, I understand. But, are they saying that because that's the polite thing to do, or they don't want to ask a question, or maybe I didn't understand because my English isn't so good, so definitely there are things that managers need to be sensitive to, to check in, in a different way,
Well, we have a pretty enlightened group of companies here with us, Jordan, but you and I were talking yesterday about what thought leaders have been discussing and talking about for a long time, the Dennings in this world, and the McChrystals, the looking at the, I don't want to call it army. What do you call it in America?
Special forces.
Special forces, thank you. We talked about the relevance of what the thought leaders have been saying since the 70s and 80s, and how is that still relevant in today's environment. Do you want to enlighten us?
Yeah, sure. And, as we talked about that, my thought is that for 30 or 40 years or more, I mean, Deming goes back to the 1950s, we've been talking about what could be called more decentralized leadership. And decentralized doesn't mean you just throw them out there and let them do what they want. There still needs to be coordination. But I haven't really heard anything new in the last 6 to 9 months, either in any of the literature or anything that anybody's saying that hasn't been said before. Help your employees understand the big picture, not just your employees, but your teams. Make sure that everybody's willing to put the key objectives of their team and their mission above their own personal. And then get them trained on leadership, communication, decision-making, and teamwork, and then support them, expect them to make decisions. And so the story that I'd like to share is I do some volunteer work for the Honor Foundation, which helps transitioning Navy SEALs and Marine Raiders transition to civilian life. And I did not serve in the military, so this was my introduction. And as a result, I read General Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. And without going into an even longer story, one of the things he did when he took over the U.S. Joint Operations Task Force, which was coordinating the work of all the different special operations and intelligence and all of that, he discovered that Al-Qaeda was kicking the United States' butt in Iraq. And it was because we had this hierarchical decision-making process. And Al-Qaeda could move really quickly. They're much more complex. And so what he did is he set up a meeting every morning, 6 days a week. There were 7,000 people on the line, and they were from all over the world. Everyone who was involved in dealing with Al-Qaeda or any other kind of emergency or dangerous situation. And the first part of the meeting was spent with everybody saying what was going on so that everybody else heard it. The second part of the meeting, then they would decide which of these are the most important for us to deal with. And then everybody would drop off who wasn't part of that group, and then they would figure out, what are we going to do? And this was a meeting of intelligence and operations together, so it didn't have to fly all the way back up to intelligence, let them sit on it for a week and come back down. They went from, if I recall correctly, being able to make a decision and get a plane flying or a troop deployed, a platoon deployed in 90 minutes, whereas in the past it was taking 90 days. And that seems to me, not 90 days, 9 hours, 90 days, 9 hours. And so, that seems to be more of what we're talking about, is to educate people on the big picture. It's no longer need to know. Let them make decisions. And typically what they would do is, if somebody on the ground made a strategic decision and it turned out to be wrong, then they would have a meeting where they would say, okay, what did we miss? And there was no rank in that meeting because everybody's life was at stake. And so that's being applied now to larger companies. And it seems to me that's the direction that we're going. And I'm just curious as to what you all think of that as you hear it.
For me, I think that's kind of the way we do business at DHL, certainly in our group in CSI. I mean, we're dealing with customer managers or commercial managers that manage the relationship of major accounts and major customers. And it's getting everybody at the table at the time that's needed. And so yes, there are, whether it's executive sponsors or the customer managers themselves, representatives from the company, everybody's kind of empowered to do what they need to do to make business happen. I mean, logistics moves quickly. So we have to ensure that we're agile and able to respond to the changing demands of the world and the customer. So I think they're pretty good about getting everybody at the table and making the decisions necessary. And sharing some of those best practices even outside of that customer now. Okay, this is what we worked on in this sector or in this customer. Here's what can be applied. So we're making sure that we're replicating those decisions and best practices going forward.
Yeah. One of the things McChrystal talked about was concern, there was the WikiLeaks thing that occurred back then. I can't remember exactly what year. And he talked about the danger of that is that there is the danger that information will get out, but it's, his conclusion was it was far worth it to get everybody educated than to, than that. I'm wondering what your experience is with that. With the idea with DHL, yeah.
Absolutely. I think a part of it is you do want to make sure that you're adhering to all of the data privacy and all of that stuff on the customer side or on the company side, and involving who needs to know. But, in keeping the information at very small circles, and then you literally end up extending the time frame it needs. And by then the decision may come at a point that it's too late for the customer, for us. So by bringing everybody to the table and sharing the information in a transparent manner, and trusting the people that you've brought to the table and empowering them to make the right decisions, I think it's worth the risk that might come. You have to trust and empower.
Yeah. I was wondering what Kathleen Procario is experiencing with that.
Yeah, as we were talking, I was thinking about how over time, companies go back and forth with more of a regional approach or more of a global approach, and it kind of ebbs and flows, right? And when I think about our global HR team and what we talk about, right, we have large calls where we update the entire HR community. We also have some subgroups where there's a representative from each region. So you're getting that input and empowerment along the way, and then we roll things out. And we often talk about freedom within a framework when we're putting out programs, right? So if a COE, like a talent management group or a compensation group, is putting something out, they're going to make it so it's flexible enough to roll out a program so that it can fit the different regions. And I do think over time, and particularly now with COVID, as we're seeing business results across the globe really being very differently affected.
Yes.
We are going to see more of a regional approach, which is going to force kind of those centralized roles to be more flexible in how they empower regions to do work. So it completely resonates in our everyday here at Bacardi as well.
Yeah, what I liked about the team of teams model, what it added for me was in the past when you decentralized, they were doing what they wanted and they weren't working together. But this was a coordinated decentralization so that everybody knew what everybody else was doing, and you still had intelligence and you still had operations hearing what's going on and making joint decisions on a regular basis.
No, for sure. And I think that we get that particularly through those sub-teams, right? That there's a report back in as well with all the information and even sharing of best practices and making connections across the globe on, that you may have a market that actually has something going on that's very similar and looking at what they've done to handle it in the past. So I think we have a nice setup within our global HR team to be connected and know enough about each other's markets to be able to lean into each other to understand things better. Super.
And then Kathleen, the other Kathleen, we have too many Kathleens on the line.
You can never have too many Kathleens. So yeah, interestingly, some of the companies that I have been speaking with were talking about once they went remote, they were deliberately having these town halls to keep everyone up to speed with what was going on, and as a result of it, they found that people were being more autonomous, like they weren't coming and asking the question because they understood better, I guess, what was going on. But interestingly, the leaders in those organizations prior to that had the assumption that people knew what was going on in the wider business because they were talking about it in the office. And I guess it's a little bit like, that assumption you make in your head that by osmosis, because you taught it while you were in the office, it went out to everyone else who was in the office, that somehow these people are running out of meetings and sharing all these things back with their teams. So that was really interesting. And in their when they were gathering feedback from their teams on what they found most beneficial since they'd gone remote, the town halls were getting a big, big thumbs up across the board because people just felt far more informed. And as I say, the knock-on impact of that was that they found team members were becoming more agile because they said, oh yeah, now we know what's happening there, or we know what's going on with that part of the business. They're closed for now, they're opening back up, whatever was happening as restrictions were lifted and so forth for different businesses.
Yeah, so that did I hear you say the knock on that was that they were becoming more autonomous? Yeah. That was a downside?
Oh no, that was an upside, the knock-on effect.
The knock-on effect. Boy, we speak some different languages.
Oh yeah, sorry. The positive outcome from that was that, yeah.
I love it. Being from New York, there are times I say things that other people think are offensive, and I meant it as a compliment in reverse.
I think that was normal language, the knock-on effect, right?
Right. I had never heard that term.
Okay. We need to have another conversation about linguistical differences among cultures.
Yes. I do a lot of coaching of people from other countries, and particularly countries where you don't contradict your boss and you just say yes. And that I forget who was saying it. I think it might have been Nicole earlier on, that it may have been Kathleen. Whoever it was, raise your hand. Just because you ask people to give you feedback and ask questions doesn't mean that they're going to, and you really have to institute it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm mindful of our time and I'm really enjoying this conversation, but I think we need to wrap it up, Jordan.
All righty. Well, I am wondering then if Kathleen and Nicole, if you have any thoughts for our audience that if you had one or two key things for them to take away from this conversation, what would those be?
So maybe I'll start. What I would tell you is, and it doesn't seem much different than the last time. I mean, managing in this new normal, in this COVID environment, for me, is really just staying connected, right? Staying connected to your customers, staying connected to your employees. So the takeaway is you have to be even that much more diligent about keeping those connections. And when people tell you that they're fine and you're not hearing from them, reach out to see how they're doing personally, reach out to see how they're doing professionally. I would say even those personal connections and those personal ways of connecting to employees have been the most successful for me in the Americas here at DHL, really seeing how people are doing and operating and what tools you can do. And then that translates into, once they have the tools and the resources they need to be successful in this virtual environment, you got to trust and empower them, right, to make the decisions they know they need to make in our environment to support our customers and our business.
Yeah, thank you. And Kathleen Procario.
Yeah, for me, I would say transparency is really key. Throughout our, whether it's town halls or we have some just virtual lunches where we get on the line and we talk with our employees out in the field, or if they're just working from home, and asking them the questions and telling them what we know at the moment and even what we don't know. If you don't know something, I think that the best way to get credibility is to just say so that you don't know at this time. And I think from that, you connect better with people. And I think that consistent communication and saying how it is, I think is really the best way to go, particularly during a challenging time.
Super. And Kathleen Halligan.
So I think to add to what the ladies have said, put on your own oxygen mask first. And in other words, take a moment out to reflect for yourself as a manager. how do I like to be managed? How do I like to operate? And recognize how that might be different to the people you work with, and then take the time to ask them, how can we work most effectively together to get the best out of each other in terms of enjoying the work that we do while we deliver the results that we have to get.
Yes, thank you. And Cellene, as we close off, I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm just wondering that if we are moving more into an emergent hybrid workplace, whether when I listen to you that I'm all about the touch points and people up front and clients up front, whether we will see a decline of a hierarchical structure flowing more into a more partnership culture, because it just can't sustain with local empowerment and accountabilities and the transparency that's needed. I think that we might see a decline in those old structures, because and those dinosaur companies have to be careful here, but how they are going to reformulate to work faster and allow people to work faster. And and if they don't work faster, if you move too slowly nowadays, then it will kill you. So you need to empower people to work at a faster speed. And if there's mistakes made, then hit the edit button, right? And adjust. But I think that was my larger takeaway. And so wrapping this up to a close and setting us up for the last episode, number 3, where we're talking about, okay, now we're figuring out the hybrid platform and the managing and the performance. Within all of that, how are we looking after the individual to thrive in the organization? So the tip of the iceberg is almost like inverted. The tip of the iceberg individual becomes critical in how the operations move forward. So I'm looking forward to episode 3 conversations. And thank you so much for your contribution again. It was a very rich conversation. And have a good 2 weeks, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Bye, guys.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Take care.
Stay safe.
Have a good evening.